I played Never Have I Ever with my friends, but it turned into the worst night of my life. Never have I ever had a threesome. Jack had his glass raised before he'd even finished the sentence. He took a long, noisy gulp of beer, making sure both me and Jenny were watching. I didn't drink, just glanced over at Jenny and rolled my eyes. She shook her head in response. Jack, you haven't had a threesome. I fucking have. No, you haven't. There isn't even one girl on campus stupid enough to sleep with you, let alone two. Jack put his pint down and grinned. Don't be jealous, Jenny. I'm sure you'll find someone soon. I can't be jealous of something that never happened, can I? Ask those two freshers if it never happened, if you're so sure. Oh yeah, and where would I find them exactly? Just look for the two most satisfied girls on campus. Jack picked up his pint and winked. They'll be more than happy to confirm the story. I snorted. Couldn't help myself. Jack might have been a prick, but he always made me laugh. He made Jenny laugh too, even if she didn't always like to show it. The three of us had been in a flat together in our first year of university, and by December, we'd already signed up to share a house for our second year. We'd made the decision fast, giddy with the honeymoon stage of our new friendship. But now I wondered if we'd been a bit too quick. We still got on well and had a laugh together, but I'd noticed Jack and Jenny starting to grate on each other lately, and their grating ended up grating on me. Looking at the frown on Jenny's face after Jack's last comment, I decided to intervene, calm things down before the night took a turn for the worse. Hang on a minute, mate. You can't drink on your own turn, can you? Surely that defeats the point of saying never have I ever. Jack looked back at me with wide, innocent eyes. Sure you can. I checked the rules. You checked the rules? Yeah, I Googled them before we came out. There's no way you Googled the rules of never have I ever before we... He's right, you know. The voice cut me off mid-flow. All three of us looked round at the same time. The girl standing next to our table wasn't anyone I recognized. She was short and blonde, with bright green eyes and a half smile on her face. Judging by the looks of confusion on Jack's and Jenny's faces, they didn't recognize her either. The three of us shared a quick, confused glance while the girl stood there. It was Jack who recovered first. You see, guys? I told you I'd look them up. He turned back to the blonde girl. Sorry, I don't think we've met before. I'm Jack. That's Max over there. And the ray of sunshine opposite me is Jenny. Jenny scowled. Are you? Jack glanced around the crowded bar, searching for the right words. Are you with anyone, or... No, I'm waiting. Later, I'd think back to that sentence. The oddness of it. Not I'm waiting for my housemates or I'm waiting for friends. Just, I'm waiting. But at the time, the thought didn't even cross my mind. I just assumed the girl was waiting for people she knew to arrive and had overheard our conversation while passing by our table. I guess all of us assumed that. Well, feel free to wait with us and play a few rounds if you want, Jack was saying now. These two keep ganging up on me, and I could use someone on my side. What did you say your name? Okay, thanks. I'll stick around for a while, the girl smiled at Jack. She brushed a lock of blonde hair from her forehead as she took a seat opposite me. I saw Jack's grin widen. I snuck a glance at Jenny and saw her sitting back in her seat, arms folded. Face unreadable. Well, we're going round clockwise, and I just had my turn, said Jack. So I guess that means it's your go. The blonde girl flicked her eyes from Jack to me. I felt a small shiver in my stomach. Her eyes were large and pixie-ish, an unusual shade of green. The poetry books I read for my English lit course would have had a lot to say about eyes like that. I glanced down at my pint, suddenly a bit embarrassed, hoping my face wasn't turning red. I was still staring at the table when the girl spoke. Never have I ever woken up in an empty house. I looked back up, my embarrassment gone as quickly as it had come. Never have I ever woken up in an empty house. What was that about? Never. Have I ever might not have been the best drinking game at uni, but I'd yet to meet a student who hadn't played it before. Everyone had. It was the kind of time-killing game you played when you didn't have a pack of cards, or when everyone was too drunk to bother with them. And because we'd all played it, we all knew the unwritten rule. The stuff you said was always sexual. It was always something sex-related. The idea was to make a statement like Jack's one about having had a threesome, then wait and see who drank. The people who drank were the ones who'd done it. Jack and Jenny's silence told me they couldn't think of any version of the game that wasn't sexual either. Jenny's previously blank face now wore a slight frown, half confusion, half exasperation. Jack just looked like a man whose bubble had burst. But being Jack, he was also the quickest to recover. He spun his glass slowly on the table and grinned across at Jenny, who had just taken a sip from hers. Don't try to tell me you're drinking, Jenny, he said. You've never even woken up in an empty bed, let alone a house. Fuck off, Jack! I took a gulp of my own drink, trying to pretend I hadn't heard the edge that had crept into Jenny's voice. Jack did the same. As I put my pint down, I stole another glance at the girl sitting opposite me. Her face was impossible to read. She had a drink in front of her that I hadn't noticed before, what looked like a gin and tonic, and she was prodding at the glass with her finger. If she had any idea she'd said something the rest of us found odd, She didn't show it. The game continued. After a bit of coaxing, Jenny eventually had her turn, and then a few minutes later I had mine. Jack went to get another round of drinks, then came back and took his. And then it was the blonde girl's turn again. I won't describe every single turn everyone took. If I'm honest, I can't remember them all. That was the point when the night began to slide away from me. To take that subtle turn that so many of our nights out did, drifting from pleasantly tipsy to suddenly far too drunk. I remember Jack saying something about shower sex that made everyone laugh. I remember downing a pint while the others chanted around me, banging the table in unison. I remember locking eyes with the blonde girl, catching her half smirk as she brushed hair from her face. And I remember some of the things she said. Some of her never have I evers. Those I do remember. While everyone else continued with the usual kind of shit, the blonde girl carried on saying weird stuff, kind of creepy stuff. Sometimes it produced awkward laughter, sometimes an awkward silence. Sometimes Jack would make an innuendo. A couple of times Jenny rolled her eyes in a really obvious way, and once she pretty much burst out laughing as soon as the girl was done talking. But I never did. The girl's face remained blank whenever she spoke, and she never gave any hint that she realized she'd said something odd. I began to feel a little bad for her, but there was no denying the strangeness of the stuff she came out with. As well as I can remember, here are a few of her never have I evers. Never have I ever woken up from a nightmare I couldn't remember. Never have I ever been completely terrified without knowing why. Never have I ever refused to look in the bathroom mirror in case someone was standing behind me. Never have I ever forgotten the worst thing that ever happened to me. Never have I ever seen a shadow from the corner of my eye. By the time she came out with that last one, I was pretty far gone. I'd lost count of how long the game had been going on for, and how much I drank. My head was spinning. My mouth felt dry. The taste of tequila I couldn't remember drinking on my tongue. I looked down and saw cluttered shot glasses on the table in front of me, limes and spilled salt, at least 6 empty pints. I went to stand up, and my hip bashed the table's edge, causing the glasses to rattle. "Hold up, Max is tapping out." Jack's words slurred into each other. He grinned up at me and drained his pint. "Get us another roundin', mate." I edged past the back of his chair, saw Jenny sitting opposite Jack, her arms folded. Isn't it her turn to get a round in? Jenny's eyes were wide and bloodshot from booze. She stared at Jack, unblinking, the anger in her face obvious. "She?" said Jack, leaning over and gripping the hand of the blonde girl. "Ish drinking on me." Before I was clear of the table, I made eye contact with the blonde girl one last time, her green eyes fixed on mine. She held my gaze for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she winked. As I stumbled away from the table into the crowded bar, I remember thinking it was strange that she still only had that one gin and tonic in front of her. Voices, music, packed, jumbled bodies. The rest of that night is a jigsaw puzzle with pieces missing. When I think back to it now, I'm not sure what's real and what isn't. Which memories are true and which are false, conjured up by my own head to fill in the blanks. I have a memory of squeezing my way across a crowded dance floor. The room spinning around me, too many faces, too much light. Pounding bass music filling my head. I remember aiming for the bar, but ending up in the toilet, crouched on all fours in a cubicle as I threw up burning tequila, my jeans damp from piss where I kneeled on the wet tiles. Time passed. I don't know how much. The next memory I have is of the dance floor. I was somewhere in the middle, clutching a slopping pint that kept spilling over my hand, dancing with random groups of people. Some of them cheered when they saw me, others turned away in disgust. I kept looking for familiar faces, for any sign of Jack or Jenny, but I couldn't see them. More time passed. The last clear memory I have from that night is of the argument. Arguing with a group of strangers. I was swaying next to a table at the back of the bar, next to our table, and I was telling the people sat there that they were in my seat. They were in all our seats. That me and my friends had been sitting there. The strangers looked confused, and then annoyed. Finally angry. One of the guys got in my face and told me to fuck off. I mumbled something I can't remember and turned away. For a split second, so fleeting I can't be sure it was real, I thought I saw Jenny. I thought I saw the back of her head. The crowd parted, and I glimpsed her on the far side of the bar, heading towards the exit. Then the crowd shifted and someone blocked my view, and I lost sight of her. I woke in the darkness of my bedroom, lurched out of sleep like a drowning man desperate for air. I'd been dreaming. A dream in which I danced with Jack and Jenny in the bar, screaming along with the lyrics of some song. And now I felt disoriented, unsure what was real and what wasn't. I also felt awful. My brain felt like it had swollen in my skull. My head pounded. I could taste alcohol and bile in my mouth. My tongue was so dry I couldn't swallow, and my stomach was empty save for acid. I reached over to my bedside table, feeling for a glass of water, and found my phone instead. 3 a.m. The house was silent around me. I couldn't hear anyone downstairs, couldn't remember how I got home. Right then, I didn't care. Right then, the only thing I wanted was for the pain in my head to go away. I slowly pushed myself up from the bed and swung my legs over the side, kept in a half crouch to try and ease my headache, a fist clenched in my stomach, a warning sign. Move too fast and you'll throw up. I pushed back the duvet and hobbled to my little ensuite bathroom, planning to gulp some water straight from the tap. Click. I switched the small light on and winced at the brightness. Over my head, the extractor fan hummed to life. Keeping my eyes squinted, I crept over to the mirror above the sink. Fuck, I looked awful. My hair stuck up in every direction, and the skin of my face was ghost pale. My eyes were bloodshot. I was still wearing the same clothes I'd been in last night. The collar of my shirt was crusted with something yellow, what I took to be vomit. Some neon pink drink had spilled down my front. I reached out and turned on the tap, stared at myself as I waited for the water to go cold. Tried to remember what had happened the previous night and how I'd got home. As I felt the water change in temperature, I lowered my head, drank from the stream like an animal, felt the cold liquid rush into my mouth, smoothing out the sandpaper of my tongue. When I finished, I splashed water on my face, turned the tap off, and wiped my eyes as I straightened up. The blonde girl was standing behind me. She was directly behind my right shoulder, staring at me in the mirror. I screamed, slipped as I tried to spin around on the spot, my foot skidding in a wet patch on the tiles. I went down hard on my left side. Shock and fear burned my nerve endings. I scrabbled on the floor, twisting myself onto my back so I could get a look at the spot where she was standing. But there was nobody there. I stared around the bathroom, pulling in deep breaths. My heart pounded hard. She'd been there, in the mirror. I'd seen her. This wasn't like one of my drunken memories that blended into a dream. She'd been in my bathroom. But now the bathroom was empty. I forced myself up into a crouch and then into a standing position, crept slowly back into my dark bedroom. Nothing. Even after I'd switched the light on, banishing the shadows that lurked in the corners, there was nothing. My bedroom door was shut, and I knew I would have heard if someone had opened it. There was nobody in my room. Nobody had been in my room. I must have imagined it. Only I hadn't imagined it. I knew I hadn't. Half an hour passed before I forced myself to climb back into bed to try and get some more sleep. I tucked a hand below my pillow and felt the rustle of paper. A single crumpled sheet that had been stuffed beneath it. All that happened months ago now. Months since the game of Never Have I Ever. And months since I saw the girl in my bathroom. Months since I found the note below my pillow. When I look back on that night, I always ask myself what I could have done differently, whether I could have changed the outcome. There are lots of things I think about, lots of specific moments and memories, and that note is one of them. As ridiculous as it was, as unbelievable as it was, I still wonder if I should have given it to the police. If I should have handed it over. But when I start thinking like that, the thought that always comes back is this: they wouldn't have taken it seriously. Who would have? Even I didn't take it seriously. Not at first. I guess I thought it was some stupid joke when I found it. Just something Jack had written for a prank. 7 little words, scrawled on a torn-off piece of notepaper. A line running through them, as if the whole sentence had been crossed out. Never have I ever met a succubus. Before I had a chance to give it a second thought, someone was banging on the front door of our house. Heavy, urgent knocks. I stuffed the note in the pocket of my jeans and went to answer it, thinking it might be my friends. But it wasn't. It was 2 police officers. I didn't believe them when they told me Jenny was dead. I couldn't. I heard their words, but they didn't make any sense to me. They didn't seem real. The officers said Jenny had been found in an alleyway behind the bar where we were drinking, lying behind a dumpster. An ambulance had been called, but she'd been pronounced dead at the scene. A heart attack, I found out later. They had some questions for me, and I guess I answered them. Questions about where we'd been, and how much we'd been drinking. About who we'd been drinking with. I told them about the game and about Jack. I told them about the blonde girl that had joined us. They took some notes, told me they'd be in touch, and went on their way. It was only after they'd left that I remembered the piece of paper in my pocket. I still have it. I'm sitting in the bedroom of my parents' house right now, staring out the window, and I can feel the crinkle of it in my jeans. Usually, I keep the thing tucked in my wallet when I'm out, so it's with me wherever I go. A reminder of what happened that night, a reminder of my friends, a reminder that no matter how many mysteries are uncovered in the world every day, and no matter how many crimes the police solve, there are just as many that they never do. Just as many questions that remain unanswered. Like the question of Jack. They never found him in the end. They looked everywhere and they interviewed people, but nothing came up. Just dead ends. A few people in the bar confirmed that they'd seen him that night, but that was about it. The CCTV in the place hadn't been working. The owner said it had malfunctioned earlier that day, and they'd been waiting to get it fixed. There was one couple who claimed they'd seen him later on, though. They said they thought they'd spotted him a few streets away from the bar where we'd been drinking, at about 2 a.m., walking in the direction of a large park near the city center, walking with a blonde girl. But no matter how hard the police looked, they could never track the girl down. Jack hasn't been seen since. I still Google his name every now and again, though, just to check. As far as I know, the case is still active, and the police are still looking for him, so I keep checking in, just to see if anything new has come up, to see if there have been any updates on the search. But there never are. And if I'm really truly honest with myself, I don't think there ever will be. Despite the police interviews, the funeral, and the nightmares, life carried on with that strange duality tragedy creates. You function on autopilot, even while your mind replays the worst moments like a stuck record. The week after Jenny's death, I sat alone in our half-packed student house, waiting for calls from the police that never came. I spent hours pacing from the living room to the tiny kitchen, phone clutched in my fist, hoping for answers but dreading more questions. Friends reached out, sure, but I felt weird talking about it. As soon as I opened my mouth, all that came out was, "I don't know," or "I can't remember." My mates would talk in hushed tones about Jenny's heart attack, how unusual it was for a healthy 20-year-old girl to drop dead. Some of them asked me about the possibility of drugs. Others whispered about pre-existing conditions that no one knew about. It seemed like everyone wanted a rational explanation for why Jenny wasn't around anymore. And the police kept circling back to the same question. "Do you remember her leaving with anyone that night?" I'd shake my head, each time more hollow than the last, because I honestly didn't know. Every memory from that moment on was drunken chaos. Just glimpses of faces, neon lights, loud music. The only times I felt certain of anything were the ones that included that strange blonde girl, that wink, those unblinking green eyes. 3 days after the funeral, I had a dream that I was sitting in the same bar booth as before, playing the same game. The blonde girl was there, but this time Jenny was at my side, alive, laughing, telling me how embarrassing I was. Then the blonde girl turned to look at me and said in that same calm voice, "Never have I ever had a piece of my soul taken." In the dream, I actually drank. I lifted my glass and drained it in silence, no one else moving. I woke up drenched in cold sweat, my mouth open like I'd been screaming. Then spent the rest of the night trying not to look in the bathroom mirror. Eventually, I dropped out of uni for the semester. I didn't want to return to the scene. The campus felt haunted by memory. My tutor was surprisingly understanding, letting me take a leave of absence. My parents convinced me to come stay with them for a while, which is how I ended up in my old bedroom, writing pages of half-coherent notes about that night, writing down everything I could remember about the blonde girl's weird statements, like I was trying to solve a puzzle no one else believed existed. The note stayed in my pocket. When I wasn't rereading my scribbles or checking the local news for any mention of Jack's name, I'd sit in my room with the lights off, phone in hand. I'd scroll through pictures of me, Jack, and Jenny from our first year. The three of us pulling silly faces, hugging at parties, at gigs, wearing daft hats. I remember we even had a photo of the first time we visited that same bar, months earlier. The place was half empty that night. No weird strangers joining our table. I thought about how the dynamic between the three of us had changed, about how Jenny used to call Jack an obnoxious idiot, yet you could tell she still laughed at his jokes before. Sometimes, I wondered if I'd overlooked tension that might mean Jack had more to do with her death than just, well, being there. But the coroner's statement was pretty conclusive. It was a heart attack. No sign of physical violence. No sign of anything, really, that explained the abruptness. If you squinted, it all looked like some freak medical event. Did the blonde girl slip Jenny something? The question rose in my mind more times than I could count, but I could never figure out how. For one thing, we'd all been hammered, but Jenny was still coherent enough to fire insults at Jack until I left for the bar. Then I never properly saw them again until morning. The timeline was a blur. The police found nothing pointing to poison or doping. There was no autopsy detail that answered anything beyond sudden cardiac failure. And yet that memory, seeing the blonde girl behind me in the mirror, would not leave me alone. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I'd get these crystal clear flashbacks. Moments so vivid, it felt like the past was happening right then. I'd be back in first year. We were living in a drab, linoleum-floored halls of residence. The first time Jack ever asked me to come out for a pint with him and Jenny, he was balancing a half-finished beer can on his head, grinning like a fool. Jenny hovered in the doorway, rolling her eyes at him, but also biting back a smile. She always had that look that said, "God, this guy's impossible, but he's entertaining." We ended up at the local student pub, where Jack made us play the earliest version of Never Have I Ever I Can Recall. Even then, he'd always pick the raunchiest topics just to see Jenny's face go red. I saw it all so perfectly, as if I could reach out and tap them on the shoulder. Then, in the memory, Jenny turned to me and whispered, "He's infuriating, but you gotta love the big idiot." And I remember thinking, we're going to be friends forever. The wave of warmth that washed over me was so strong it hurt. Then, in the present, I'd open my eyes to the darkness of my childhood bedroom, tears soaking my pillow. I guess I latched onto these flashbacks because they reminded me that things hadn't always been bleak. That once, everything had been normal. I'd try to cling to that feeling so I wouldn't drown in the what-ifs swirling in my mind. A couple of weeks after Jenny's funeral, I worked up the nerve to send Jack a message. Even though everyone told me that was insane, he was missing, presumably in trouble or involved in something deeper. I just needed some closure. Me, 8:12 p.m. Hey mate, if you see this, let me know you're okay, please. I half expected the message to bounce, but it didn't. It even showed that the text had been delivered. Hours later, I saw the read receipt. Read at 3:21 a.m. My stomach dropped. I kept checking my phone, but no response ever arrived. I tried calling the next day. It didn't ring. It went straight to voicemail. Hey, you've reached Jack. You know what to do. He sounded so lively in the recording. I didn't leave a message, though. I just hung up. But after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had actually read my text. Maybe it was Jack. Maybe it was whoever had his phone. I didn't know which possibility was more terrifying. The nightmares kept up, especially the recurring one about the bar. But real life provided its own frights. About a month after the funeral, I got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I was back at my parents' place by then, so I tiptoed quietly, not wanting to wake them. The hallway was dark, the only light a faint glow from the street lamp outside. I was still half asleep, stumbling with my eyes half closed. Then, as I stepped in front of the mirror in the upstairs hallway, I froze. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't alone. For just a heartbeat, I saw a figure behind me in the darkness. A pale face, ringed by blonde hair, eyes wide and green as poison. I spun around. Nothing but shadows. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure I'd wake my parents. I forced myself to breathe, in and out, tried telling myself this was just some leftover guilt or fear, and that I was scaring myself. But the primal terror that shot through my veins took forever to fade. I ended up sitting on the edge of the bathtub for close to an hour, too scared to shuffle back to my room. My phone was in my hand, open to old pictures of Jenny, of Jack. A feeling grew in me that I was forgetting something important, that there was something about the blonde girl that should have been obvious. That moment, the note in my pocket felt like a heavier weight than ever. Even though the police mostly treated Jenny's death as an isolated tragedy, open and shut medical cause, they didn't fully ignore Jack's disappearance. Once a month or so, a detective would call me, always with the same questions. Have you heard from Jack? Did he mention any new friend? Any blonde girl he was seeing? Do you remember any strange details from that night? I answered no to all of them. Every single time. They'd either sigh or give some polite, thanks for your cooperation, then hang up. It was as though they wanted me to confirm a normal explanation for everything. Jack kidnapped Jenny, or they fought or something. But that didn't line up with a random heart attack in a grimy alley or the zero sign of foul play. So after a few months, they mostly faded away. I was left with no official closure and no real next steps. Just me, the slip of paper I'd found under my pillow, and an ever-growing sense that some crucial puzzle piece was missing. I returned to campus once, during the break, telling myself it was to see if Jack might come back to the house we used to share. Realistically, I think I was just looking for any ghosts he might have left behind. Maybe I'd find some clue or a scribbled note. Maybe I'd find her. The place was half empty, most students gone for the holiday. As I walked across the courtyard by the library, I kept thinking I saw flashes of blonde hair in my peripheral vision. By the time I reached the bar where we'd played the game, my palms were sweaty. I wasn't sure if the bar would even be open, but it was. Quiet, no music, a few people perched on stools. The same battered table was still there, a few chipped chairs around it. My throat went dry as I approached, expecting, I'm not sure, some revelation, some memory to slam into me. But nothing happened. It was just an old wooden table. No cosmic sign. I circled it anyway, glancing underneath like a fool. All I found were a couple of bits of gum and the stale smell of spilled beer. I ended up buying a pint, sipping it in silence, while some local guys chatted about football. For a few minutes, I was sure I saw something move in the corner of the bar, behind a row of dusty shelves. I got up to check. Nothing. Just a dim shape that could have been a jacket on a hook. I felt like an idiot. I finished my drink and left. I sometimes hear that line in my head, as if the blonde girl is right beside me, continuing her list of bizarre statements, because that's what it feels like now. Like I've been rattled by a ghost story that no one else quite believes. Even I can't be sure it's true. Sure, the facts of Jenny's death and Jack's disappearance are undeniable. But the glimpses in the mirror, the note about the succubus, the wink, who's to say how real any of that is? Still, I cling to the idea that something more happened that night. I don't want to reduce it to just a tragedy, because if there's no meaning, then Jenny's gone forever, with no explanation. Jack is gone. A few lines in a missing persons file, and I'm left holding a puzzle piece that belongs to a puzzle no one else is putting together. The note now sits folded in the back of my phone case. Every day, I think, maybe I should burn it. Then I think, maybe this is the only proof I have. And so it remains. The words scratched out in messy handwriting. Never have I ever met a succubus. Sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I wonder if I should speak that line out loud, just to see what happens. A tiny, terrified part of me thinks, what if that line is like an invitation? Because after all, the never have I ever statements only work if you've done them, or if you want to. The last dream of Jenny. A month ago, I had a dream so vivid that I woke up convinced it was a message. Jenny was standing at the edge of a large park in the city, one I recognized as the place the couple claimed to see Jack heading toward. Night pressed in around her. She wore the black skirt and boots she'd had on the night she died. She was looking at me with this sad, soft expression I'd never seen her wear in real life. "Max," she said quietly, "I saw her follow him. In the dream, I stepped forward, but Jenny shook her head. Don't come! Don't look for me!" Then she turned and walked into the shadows beneath the park's trees, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like if I followed, I'd never come back. I woke up drenched in sweat, my breath ragged. I guess my subconscious was telling me to stop searching for Jack, or the thing that took him. But even now, I can't shake the question. What if he's still alive somehow? What if the blonde girl didn't kill him, but claimed him in some way beyond my comprehension? There's a limit to how many times you can tell the same story to people who don't believe you, or who think you're dealing with survivor's guilt. So nowadays, I mostly keep quiet. I let the official narrative be what it is. A missing persons case and an unrelated fatal heart attack. The rest I keep locked inside. Occasionally, I'll gather the courage to reread the poem I wrote for Jenny after her funeral. It was an assignment for my English Lit seminar, ironically. The professor let me submit it late. In it, I tried to capture the sense of missing something vital and intangible, that fleeting moment of youth and friendship cut off abruptly. On the final page, I wrote a line that feels like the only honest statement I can make these days. Never have I ever forgiven myself for living. I guess that's how life is now. A chain of nevers that grow heavier by the day. I keep waiting. Maybe not for the blonde girl or for a final confrontation in the mirror, but for some sign that the world still makes sense, that people don't vanish into the night with a wink and a soft chuckle. Until that day comes, I'll hold onto that piece of paper like a talisman, or like the black box from a plane crash, the only clue to what really went wrong in the final moments. And if I'm really truly honest with myself, I don't think there ever will be any other explanation, at least not one that would make sense to anyone else. But I'll keep looking, just in case.